You ever just stop and think about the really big questions? I mean, how we all manage to live together in society, day in and day out. Well, that's pretty much what political theory is all about. It's this huge ongoing conversation about how we organize ourselves. So let's dive right in. I mean, really think about it. Every single day, we follow laws, we pay taxes, we accept that this group of people called the government has authority over us. But why? Why do we do it? This isn't just some abstract puzzle for a philosophy class. It's the fundamental agreement that holds our entire world together. Answering this is, well, it's the first step to understanding literally everything else about politics. Okay, to get to the bottom of that, we have to talk about the biggest player in the game, the state. Now, on the surface, it seems simple, right? It's the government, the institutions, the borders you see on a map. But as you're about to see, figuring out what the state is and what it's even for, that's one of the oldest and most intense debates in human history. Let's rewind way back to the ancient Greeks. For a thinker like Aristotle, the state wasn't some kind of necessary evil or artificial contract. No, he saw it as something totally natural, kind of like a family, just on a much bigger scale. The whole point wasn't just to help people survive, it was to help them flourish, to achieve what he called the good life. For him, the state was fundamentally a force for human excellence. All right, now let's fast forward a couple of thousand years. A whole new way of thinking pops up from a group called the social contract theorists. To figure out why we even need a state, they came up with this really cool thought experiment. They asked, what was life actually like before any governments? What was this so-called state of nature? And wow, their answers could not have been more different. So first up is Thomas Hobbes. He was writing during the total chaos of the English Civil War, and it really shaped his view. For him, the state of nature was an absolute nightmare. He thought that without a powerful ruler, we'd all just be driven by our own self-interest and fear, leading to constant conflict. Life, as he famously put it, would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So for Hobbes, the state is this all-powerful leviathan we create out of fear, basically to save us from ourselves. But then you have John Locke, who comes along and says, whoa, hold on a second. He had a much sunnier take on things. Locke believed that even in a state of nature, we weren't just wild animals. We were governed by a law of nature. We have these natural, God-given rights to life, liberty, and property. His state of nature wasn't a constant war. It was actually pretty peaceful. So why create a government? Well, for Locke, it was just to have a neutral referee to settle disputes and protect the rights we already had. So this is the crucial takeaway. You've got this epic clash of ideas. For Hobbes, it is all about security. We give up our freedom because we're scared of chaos, and we need an absolute ruler to keep us safe. But for Locke, the number one goal is liberty. We consent to be governed, not controlled. The government's job is just to protect the rights we are born with, and its power has to be limited. This one debate, security versus liberty, is a fault line that runs right through politics to this very day. Okay, so let's say we have a state, but that just leads to another huge question, right? Who's actually in charge? Who's really pulling the levers of power? Yeah, it's easy to point to presidents or prime ministers or parliaments. But the real story of power, well, it's often a lot more complicated and a lot more hidden. Before we go any further, let's just get on the same page about what power even means. Political scientists Laswell and Kaplan basically define their entire field as the study of the shaping and sharing of power. Put simply, power is just the ability to influence outcomes, to get someone to do something they wouldn't have done otherwise. It's the engine of all politics, but who's in the driver's seat? This is where things get really interesting. You've got these three totally different theories about who's in control. First, there's the pluralist view. This is kind of the optimistic textbook version of democracy, where power is spread out among all these different competing groups and no single one gets to dominate. But then, the elitist theory comes in and says, yeah, right. It argues that behind the scenes, a tiny, connected power elite, we're talking top business, military, and political leaders, are the ones really calling the shots, no matter who wins an election. And then the Marxist view says you're both missing the point. It's not about groups or secret elites, it's all about economic class. The state is just a tool used by the rich to protect their wealth and keep everyone else in line. And just when you think you have it figured out, you get a quote like this one. Feminist theorist Catherine McKinnon basically throws a wrench in all those other theories. She argues that we've missed a huge dimension, gender. From her perspective, the state itself, its laws, its very structure, isn't neutral at all. It was built on and continues to reinforce male power. It's a powerful idea that forces us to ask, what other invisible power structures are we just not seeing? So, we have all these different ideas floating around about the state and about power. And they don't just stay as abstract theories. They get bundled together into what we call ideologies. You can think of them as competing blueprints for how society ought to be built. They're the grand visions that political battles are fought over. Let's take a look at one of the most influential blueprints out there: liberalism. At its very core is the individual. It's all about personal freedom. It has this deep faith in our ability to use reason to figure things out. It's committed to justice, not by guaranteeing outcomes, but by giving everyone an equal opportunity. And it demands that we tolerate beliefs and lifestyles different from our own. These core ideas have, without a doubt, shaped the modern world. Of course, no big idea goes unchallenged. Socialism really grew as a direct response to the massive inequalities that came with industrial capitalism. It offered a totally different blueprint. See, where liberalism focuses on the individual, socialism's core values are things like community, cooperation, and social equality. The central idea here is that society should work for the good of everyone, not just for individual profit. The goal is to shrink that gap between the rich and the poor by sharing resources more fairly. So we've just rocketed through a few thousand years of political thought. But why should any of us care about Aristotle or Hobbes or these competing theories of power? Because this conversation, this massive debate about how we should all live together, it is far from over. In fact, it's more relevant right now than ever before. Seriously, every time you see a news story about government surveillance versus our right to privacy, that's Hobbes versus Locke playing out right in front of you. Every time people argue about the influence of big money in politics, they're wrestling with elitist and pluralist theories. These ideas, they're like the invisible operating system running in the background of our entire political world. You know, getting a handle on these concepts isn't just a fun academic game. As this quote gets at, it's a tough but essential responsibility for any citizen. It's the hard work of thinking critically about the world we live in, and more importantly, the world we want to create. Look, we've really only scratched the surface here, but you now have a basic toolkit, a few new lenses for looking at the political world. So the final question isn't for me to answer, it's for you. When you look at the news tomorrow, when you look at your own community, what do you see now that maybe you didn't see before?